Welcome to The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Syrett. As a child, one of my favorite books was A Journey into the Interior of the Earth by Jules Verne. The story involves a professor who leads his nephew and a hired guide down a volcano in Iceland to the center of the Earth. On this episode of The Conspiracy Show, we're going to meet an engineer and physicist and organizer of the North Pole Inner Earth Expedition. He intends to rent a Russian nuclear icebreaker and lead a team of scientists to a remote section of the Arctic Ocean, where they hope to discover an inner passage into our hollow Earth. Although the hollow Earth theory has been dismissed by most mainstream scientists, the 18th century British astronomer Edward Halley of Halley's Comet fame believed the Earth is hollow and might support life. In some mystical traditions, it's believed that ascended masters of esoteric wisdom inhabited subterranean caverns inside the hollow Earth. We'll also meet an historian who also believes the Earth is hollow and that it may in fact be inhabited by an advanced race of beings. And of course, we'll speak to a skeptic who insists the hollow Earth theory is simply bad science. Me? I just want the truth, and I'm willing to follow it wherever it leads. It is time to redefine reality. Genetic enigma or a human alien hybrid?
There was at least two gunmen, one was firing from the nose.
Is it possible technology can alter weather patterns
Created by the corporation.
has been engineered by the Illuminati?
There's no doubt.
Many scientists, including the Japanese, believe that it's probably one of the most ancient myths on the planet, that Earths form as hollow spheres, not as solid balls. One thing I do know as a scientist, if there is a void there, there will be life.
Brooks, who first theorized that the Earth is hollow?
That's a good question. I think anciently, Plato and some of the early Greek writers mentioned legends of a hollow Earth. In some of the ancient Egyptian writings, some of the race escaped into the Earth. Of course, there are legends from the Maya who were constantly searching for openings into the inner Earth. They believed that life force came out of the Earth. I think scientifically and quasi-modern times, it would have to be Edmund Halley. He was the first one that really created hollow Earth theory. The interesting thing I found is that nobody's ever been. Nobody's actually sailed to the Arctic looking for that opening. Those waters have been covered with ice since the Earth cooled, and in 2007 they opened for the first time.
I've come up with substantial evidence from Scripture, from history, from science, that our Earth is indeed hollow. We know from the Scriptures that hell, the location of hell where the devil and his angels live, is down. But we also find out where heaven is. In Ephesians chapter 4, it says, before Christ ascended into heaven after his resurrection, he first ascended into the lower parts of the earth. The location of paradise, where Christ went to heaven at death, was in the heart of the earth.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And if you're going to claim that there are animals and plants and things living inside of our planet, there's definitely a need for some extraordinary evidence there.
Sir Edmund Halley was a pretty famous astronomer, a member of the, I believe, the Royal Academy of Scientists in Britain. How could he have been so wrong?
Edmund Halley was a fantastically intelligent guy, and using the technology that he had, he discovered a comet. And the fact that he was able to do that and give us the information that he was able to give us is extraordinary. But that doesn't mean that everything that he says was right.
Give me the best geological evidence that the Earth is, as you believe, hollow.
Well, I think the best geological evidence is going to be seismological. The USGS tied all their listening posts on the Earth together as one system. Now, when there's a heavy earthquake on one side of the planet, they're picked up with other listening stations around the planet, and we kind of take a CAT scan of the Earth. Washington University studied 600,000 of these under the direction of Dr. Y. Sessions, and they discovered the damping waves from another ocean underneath the Atlantic Ocean, underneath the crust.
It's really interesting to think, well, what if the Earth were hollow? But what we can do as scientists is say, if the Earth was hollow, what kind of evidence would we expect to see?
We've got these CAT scans of the Earth that reveal a void inside the planet.
A lot of the stuff that is quoted as evidence out there either isn't scientific or is simply incorrect.
But for both types of waves, seismic waves, there is a place on the opposite side of the Earth from the epicenter where there is a shadow zone.
We do know that the Earth contains iron and nickel in very high densities. And we know this by looking at those seismic radio waves and how they're deflected.
Well, scientists claim it's because S waves cannot go through molten lava, but the P waves should be able to go through it. This barrier inside the Earth is actually the hollow, which the seismic waves cannot go through.
We do know the Ross gull, which is a very small, dainty little seagull that my great-great-grandfather named. It flies north in the wintertime. It's not built for 80 below weather, so it finds someplace warm north to spend the winter.
Let's suspend disbelief for a moment and imagine that if the Earth were hollow, could it sustain life? And how could it sustain life?
I can't imagine a way that it would sustain life simply because you have, of course, problems with the fact that we depend on the sun. All life on Earth is dependent on the sun. And without that star, we wouldn't be here. And so it's very difficult for me as a biologist to believe that life could exist in an environment that has nothing as far as energy supply from that sun.
Inside the planet, we probably don't have a fusion source of light like we have here. It's probably a very hot iron core, like a one solid iron crystal. And if that's so, and it's anywhere around 5,000 degrees, it's probably glowing white hot. And if it's glowing white hot, it's a source of light.
The inner sun they estimate to be about 600 miles in diameter. It generates electromagnetic energy, and it comes out in the form of light and heat that gives life and life to us and the people inside the Earth.
The gravitational pull of something that was massive enough to, and I'm not talking massive as far as size, but massive even as far as density, that it would have such a huge gravitational pull that things existing within that core would simply be sucked into it.
Now, I did a calculation on the inner sun, and it only consists of about 0.099% of the weight of the Earth. So the inner sun having such a small mass, it doesn't exert hardly any gravitational interaction.
Once you get up to the North Pole, what do you expect to find?
We do know the Ross gull, which is a very small, dainty little seagull that my great-great-grandfather named. It flies north in the wintertime. It's not built for 80 below weather, so it finds someplace warm north to spend the winter. I spoke to the leading ornithologist in Sweden on this bird. They have no clue where this bird goes.
Well, that might be an anomaly, but that doesn't necessarily lead you to believe that the Earth is hollow. And of course, as scientists, we have to look at Occam's razor, because the most simple explanation is most likely the right one.
Every few years, there is a zoological, an oceanographic expedition, and they sample sea rays because these have a tendency to show up new species every now and then. Normally, they'll see 5, 10, maybe 20 new species. After the 2007 ice shelf broke off, they did their routine sampling, 1,500 new species of rays. There is no way that these kinds of rays could evolve in that short amount of time. They had to come from another sea somewhere.
The interesting thing about the discovery of any new species is that our Earth is a vast place. And there are species that are discovered every day. There are thousands of species that will go extinct before we ever find them. Our ability to find new species increases every day. And if you're going to find thousands of new species, the ocean is the place to be. And that's where those new species that he is referring to are coming from.
According to the legends, what do you expect to find inside the interior of the Earth?
There will be life. It might be microbial, it might be more complex, like a fish or a bird, and then again, it may be civilized.
The story of the lost Vikings that colonized Greenland for about 1,000 years and just disappeared, Admiral Perry in 1909, he knew Eskimo language, and he asked them, where did these lost Viking colonists go? They said that, well, the hunting party came from the north one winter and said that they had found a paradise. And so they all just packed up their bags, the Eskimo said, and just traipsed off across the ice towards the north and never came back. Well, he was presently sighted by flying saucer type craft that took control of his airplane and landed him near an inner Earth city. He was taken before the government officials of the inner world, and they gave him a message to take back to Washington.
Do you think it's possible that the dinosaurs survived this cataclysmic event of a comet striking the planet 60 million years ago, and they are actually alive, living inside the hollow Earth?
I think it's possible. When you look at, for instance, woolly mammoth migration around the Siberian desert, you'll see a ring of mammoth bones and tusks and everything about one stomach's worth of distance from a certain spot. This certain spot happens to be very close to where we're going. We haven't seen any dinosaurs in that ring, but we have seen woolly mammoths, lots of them, thousands of them.
The mammoths that have also been trotted out as this mammoth couldn't possibly have been preserved in the ice, and it had to have been recently frozen. And that is very easy on a histological perspective to prove wrong because of the damage done to the cells over the flash freezing and slow freezing processes. And so you can look at the cellular level and tell exactly how long that mammoth has been frozen in the ice.
Tell me about Admiral Byrd's flight over the Antarctic.
Admiral Byrd is an aviation hero, no question about it. Evidently, he did discover something, but officially he could not report on that. The rumors that came out, and rumors of rumors, and rumors of diaries, lush green forests with liquid water and woolly mammoths, and where certainly none should have been. What's the truth? It's difficult to tell. That's one of the reasons why we want to do this expedition. Let's prove or disprove the biggest myth in human history.
There's an account that he flew past the ice, came to a continent covered with less vegetation, even saw a mammoth wandering on the terrain below. Well, he was presently sighted by flying saucer type craft that took control of his airplane and landed him near an inner Earth city. He was taken before the government officials of the inner world, and they gave him a message to take back to Washington. And they did not approve of our use of nuclear weapons. We had just blown up a couple of cities at the end of World War II. So they put him back in the air. He took the message to Washington, but they told him they didn't want him telling his story to anybody, but he couldn't keep his mouth shut. We've found several people that have claimed that they talked to him and he told them what happened.
Are there eyewitness accounts, or is there anecdotal evidence to suggest that UFOs are coming out of these openings?
Yes, lots of eyewitness reports, even official ones, military ones. We've interviewed radio operators for the Navy that received official messages from ships at sea that talked about large silver ships coming up out of the water. In fact, they're so common they're called USOs, undersea objects, instead of unidentified flying objects. So they're actually more plentiful than ones that fly in the air.
Yeah, I believe that the lost tribes of Israel actually did migrate to the Hollow Earth. They have been living there for 2,500 years, so they have become much more advanced and scientifically than us. I believe that they have what we've seen flying around the Earth, the flying saucer type craft that people have seen all over the Earth.
Now, if Brooks Agnew goes to the North Pole and finds a big hole there and comes back with evidence, then we have to re-examine it.
When we look at satellite images of the Earth, and more specifically of the Arctic or the North Pole region, what do we see? Why can't we see that opening if it's there?
Well, that's one of the most puzzling questions that I still don't have an answer to. For one thing, in 2006, there was a new rule passed called the Data Denial Act. This prohibited real-time imagery of the Earth above the 60th parallel. So you cannot find any publicly available satellite images of the North Pole. They're just not available. You can't find them anywhere. They're all classified. The ones that we were able to get our hands on, because of the way satellites stitch the photographs together, they're stitched at the poles. So what you see is a nice round dark spot at the North Pole where all these pictures are stitched together, but that part's left out. The other images, that even oblique angles that we were able to get, are all covered in clouds. So there are just no images of this region of the Earth from the air.
Is that by design, do you think? Is somebody somewhere trying to hide the fact that there is an opening to the Earth?
Well, I really don't know the answer to that. I just know that it's not available. So it raises all kinds of questions like, is somebody trying to keep it secret? Well, if they are, they're doing a really good job.
And what are you trying to do? How are you going to get there? Who's coming with you?
That's a very good question. There are only 2 civilian ships on Earth that can make this expedition. Both of them are nuclear powered. They belong to the Russians. They used to belong to the Soviets. They're 23,000 tons, about 450 feet long. There's a helicopter on them. So they're well outfitted, so we can get some very serious, credible measurements and samples during this 15-day expedition.
Yeah, the Russian nuclear icebreaker is called the Yamal. It means end of Earth. And there is a peninsula up there in the Russian Arctic. It's called Yamal too.
It's not actually the North Pole. The North Pole's been sailed every year for 30 years. It's off from the North Pole several hundred miles. This is in a region that's never been sailed before. It's between the magnetic North Pole and the actual North Pole. The waters are reported to be the roughest on the planet. So we're talking 10-story seas. This is not going to be a pleasure cruise by any stretch of the imagination. We'll be breaking ice for 8 days to get there. So it's not an easy place to get to.
Are you personally planning on going into the interior of the Earth?
That's a really good question. I'm going to be on the helicopter that flies over the opening, and we'll play it by ear. I do plan to return and live to tell about it.
I applaud that he's willing to actually go out and look for evidence to support his claim. And that's what a good scientist is all about. And if he wants to go up there and see if there's a hole there, more power to him. That's what it's going to take to convince people like me and other scientists that there is a hole in the Earth and that the Earth is hollow.
What do you need in order to push this over the top and to make this expedition happen?
We need to finance the deposit on the ship, which is roughly half the money, about $1 million. Once that's done, we'll make a global announcement that the expedition is officially on, and at that point, Richard, there's more people know about the Hollow Earth than knew about Middle Earth before the movies came out. We have tens of millions of enthusiasts all around the world that are ready to come to the support of this expedition once it becomes a reality.
So do you expect to find some sort of a large opening big enough that you could actually sail a nuclear vessel through?
We don't really know how big this opening is. It could be as much as 100 miles across. It could be as small as 20 miles across. In any case, when you're at sea, you only get about 8 or 9 miles of view. Then the curvature of the Earth takes over. So this could have been sailed by lots of times and never seen. I did speak to some retired Navy admirals, and they told me there is an anomaly at sea. They call it the Oceanic Depression. It's a place where 2 ships can be sailing side by side, and one will just sail out of view for sometimes a day at a time and then come back up. These are places where sea level is not sea level. It's kind of concave. Now, their theory is that these are spots on the Earth that the gravitational field is more intense, so it pulls the water down. And I proposed a different theory, which got them thinking. What if these are areas on the Earth where the gravity is actually lower than it is everywhere else, and the outside gravity pulls the water away? That would fit Hollow Earth theory, that the gravity is centered in the crust, not in the core so much. And that would mean that the water could get pulled away from an opening and you could actually sail right into it and never know. Because if it was 100 miles across, you'd never see the curvature.
Now, if Brooks Agnew goes to the North Pole and finds a big hole there and comes back with evidence, then we have to re-examine it.
If the North Pole Inner Earth Expedition finds an opening into our hollow Earth, what then? What if they find life? Not mere microbial life, but mammalian. How about woolly mammoths or other species thought to be long extinct? What if they find advanced human civilizations? What then? Not only will we have to rewrite many of our textbooks, we'll have to rethink just about everything we think we know about who we are and where we came from. After speaking with Brooks Agnew, I couldn't help but think of the words of Jules Verne himself. Was I to believe him in earnest in this intention to penetrate to the center of this massive globe? Had I been listening to the mad speculations of a lunatic, or to the scientific conclusions of a lofty genius? And now, I'd like to know what you think. You can contact me here at The Conspiracy Show through our website, www.theconspiracyshow.com. In the meantime, don't be afraid.